as you can tell, we're back with a history video, and I thought for this one, with the Olympics around the corner, it would be a fitting excuse to do a history video on them. It's been on the list for some time, and there's not really going to be a better point for me to do this video, so gonna get straight into it, straight into the moving images while we whisper through the history of the Olympic Games. Enjoy. The Olympic Games are an athletic festival that originated in ancient Greece and was revived in the late 19th century. Before the 1970s, the Games were officially limited to competitors with amateur status. But in the 1980s, many events were open to professional athletes. Currently, the Games are open to all, even the top professional athletes in basketball and soccer. The ancient Olympic Games included several of the sports that are now part of the Summer Games program, which at times has included events in as many as 32 different sports. In 1924, the Winter Games were sanctioned for winter sports. The Olympic Games have come to be regarded as the world's foremost sports competition. So we firstly begin by going back to the ancient Olympic Games. Just how far back in history organised athletic contests were held remains a matter of debate, but it's reasonably certain that they occurred in Greece almost 3,000 years ago. However ancient in origin, by the end of the 6th century BCE, at least 4 Greek sporting festivals, sometimes called classical games, had achieved major importance. The Olympic Games held at Olympia, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the Nemean Games at Nemea, and the Isthmian Games held near Corinth. Later, similar festivals were held in nearly 150 cities as far afield as Rome, Naples, Odysseus, Antioch, and Alexandria. Of all the games held throughout Greece, the Olympic Games were the most famous. Held every 4 years between August 6th and September 19th, they occupied such an important place in Greek history that in late antiquity historians measured time by the interval between them, an Olympiad. The Olympic Games, like almost all Greek games, were an intrinsic part of a religious festival. They were held in honour of Zeus at Olympia by the city-state of Elis in the northwestern Peloponnese. The first Olympic champion listed in the records was Corybus of Elis, a cook who won the sprint race in 776 BCE. Notions that the Olympics began much earlier than 776 are founded on myth, not historical evidence. According to one legend, for example, the games were founded by Heracles, son of Zeus. So, at the meeting in 776 BCE, there was apparently only one event, a foot race that covered one length of the track at Olympia, but other events were added over the ensuing decades. The race, known as the Stade, was about 192 metres long. The word Stade also came to refer to the track on which the race was held, and is the origin of the modern English word stadium. In 724 BC, a 2-length race, the Diaulos, roughly similar to the 400-metre race, was included, and 4 years later, the Dolikos, a long-distance race possibly comparable to the modern 1,500 or 5,000-metre events, was added. Wrestling and the pentathlon were introduced in 708 BC. The latter was an all-round competition consisting of 5 events: the long jump, javelin throw, discus, foot race, and wrestling. Boxing was introduced in 688 BC, and chariot racing 8 years later. In 648, the pancratium, a kind of no-holds-barred combat, was included. This brutal wrestling, boxing and street fighting. Kicking and hitting a downed opponent were allowed. Only biting and gouging were forbidden. Between 632 and 616 BC, events for boys were introduced, and from time to time further events were added, including a foot race in which athletes ran in partial armour, and contests for heralds and for trumpeters. The programme, however, was not nearly so varied as that of modern Olympics. There were neither team games nor ball games, and the athletics events were limited to the 4 running events and the pentathlon mentioned above. Chariot races and horse racing, which became part of the ancient games, were held in the hippodrome south of the stadium. In the early centuries of Olympic competition, all the contests took place on one day. Later the games were spread over 4 days, with a 5th devoted to the closing ceremony, presentation of prizes, and a banquet for the champions. In most events, the athletes participated in the nude. Through the centuries, scholars have sought to explain this practice. Theories have ranged from the eccentric to the usual anthropological, religious and social explanations, including the following. Nudity bespeaks a rite of passage. Nudity was a holdover from the days of hunting and gathering. Nudity had for the Greeks a magical power to ward off harm, and public nudity was a kind of costume of the upper class. Historians grasp at dubious theories because, in Judeo-Christian society, to compete nude in public seems odd, if not scandalous. Yet ancient Greeks found nothing shameful about nudity, especially male nudity. Therefore, the many modern explanations of Greek athletic nudity are in the main unnecessary. The Olympic Games were technically restricted to freeborn Greeks. Many Greek competitors came from the Greek colonies on the Italian peninsula and in Asia Minor and Africa. Most of the participants were professionals who trained full-time for the events. These athletes earned substantial prizes for winning at many other preliminary festivals, and although the only prize at Olympia was a wreath or garland, an Olympic champion who received widespread adulation and often lavish benefits from his home city. That brings us to women and the Olympic Games. Although there were no women's events in the ancient Olympics, several women appear in the official lists of Olympic victors as the owners of the stables of some victorious chariot entries. In Sparta, girls and young women did practice and compete locally, but apart from Sparta, contests for young Greek women were very rare and probably limited to an annual local foot race. At Olympia, however, the Herian festival, held every 4 years in honour of the goddess Hera, included a race for young women, who were divided into 3 age groups. Yet the Herian race was not part of the Olympics, and probably was not instituted before the advent of the Roman Empire. Then, for a brief period, girls competed at a few other important athletic venues. The 2nd century CE traveller Pausanias wrote that women were banned from Olympia during the actual games under penalty of death, yet he also remarked that the law and penalty had never been invoked. His account later incongruously stated that unmarried women were allowed as Olympic spectators. Many historians believe that a later scribe simply made an error copying this passage of Pausanias' text here. Nonetheless, the notion that all or only married women were banned from the games endured in popular writing on the topic, though the evidence regarding women as spectators remains unclear. Now, the demise of the Olympics. Greece Greece lost its independence to Rome in the middle of the 2nd century BC, and support for the competitions at Olympia and elsewhere fell off considerably during the next century. The Roman looked on athletics with contempt. To strip naked and compete in public was degrading in their eyes. The Romans realized the political value of the Greek festivals, however, and Emperor Augustus staged games for Greek athletes in a temporary wooden stadium erected near the Circus Maximus in Rome, and instituted major new athletic festivals in Italy and in Greece. Emperor Nero was also a keen patron of the festivals in Greece, but he disgraced himself and the Olympic Games when he entered a chariot race, fell off his vehicle, and then declared himself the winner anyway. Romans neither trained for nor participated in Greek athletics. Roman gladiator shows and team chariot racing were not related to the Olympic Games or to Greek athletics. The main difference between the Greek and Roman attitudes is reflected in the words each culture used to describe its festivals. For the Greeks they were contests or agonies, while for the Romans they were games, ludi. The Greeks originally organised their festivals for the competitors, the Romans for the public. One was primarily competition, the other entertainment. The Olympic Games were finally abolished about 400 CE by the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, or his son, because of the festival's pagan associations. That brings us into the modern Olympic movement, beginning with the revival of the Olympics. So the ideas and work of several people led to the creation of the modern Olympics. The best known architect of the modern games was Pierre de Coubertin, born in Paris on New Year's Day 1863. Family tradition pointed to an army career or possibly politics, but at age 24, Coubertin decided that his future lay in education, especially physical education. In 1890, he travelled to England to meet Dr. William Penny Brooks, who had written some articles on education that attracted the Frenchman's attention. Brooks also had tried for decades to revive the ancient Olympic Games, getting the idea from a series of modern Greek Olympiads held in Athens, starting in 1859. The Greek Olympics were founded by Evangelos Zapas, who in turn got the idea from Panagiotis Soutsos, a Greek poet who was the first to call for a modern revival and began to promote the idea in 1833. Brooks's first British Olympiad, held in London in 1866, was successful, with many spectators and good athletes in attendance, but his subsequent attempts met with less success and were beset by public apathy and opposition from rival sporting groups. Rather than give up, in the 1880s Brooks began to argue for the founding of International Olympics in Athens. When Coubertin sought to confer with Brooks about physical education, Brooks talked more about Olympic revivals and showed him documents relating to both the Greek and the British Olympiads. He also showed Coubertin newspaper articles reporting his own proposal for International Olympic Games. On November 25, 1892, at a meeting of the Union des Sports Athletiques in Paris, with no mention of Brooks or these previous modern Olympiads, Coubertin himself advocated the idea of reviving the Olympic Games, and he propounded his desire for a new era in international sport when he said, "Let us export our oarsmen, our runners, our fencers into other lands. That is the true free trade of the future, and the day it is introduced into Europe, the cause of peace will have received a new and strong ally. He then asked his audience to help him in the splendid and beneficent task of reviving the Olympic Games. The speech did not produce any appreciable activity, but Coubertin reiterated his proposal for an Olympic revival in Paris in June 1894, at a conference on international sport, attended by 79 delegates representing 49 organisations from 9 countries. Coubertin himself wrote that, except for his co-workers, Dimitrios Fikalas of Greece, who was to be the first president of the International Olympic Committee, and Professor William M. Sloan of the United States from the College of New Jersey, no one had any real interest in the revival of the Games. Nevertheless, and to quote Coubertin again, a unanimous vote in favour of revival was rendered at the end of the Congress chiefly to please me. It was at first agreed that the Games should be held in Paris in 1900. 6 years seemed a long time to wait, however, and it was decided to change the venue to Athens and the date to April 1896. A great deal of indifference, if not opposition, had to be overcome, including a refusal by the Greek Prime Minister to stage the Games at all. But when a new Prime Minister took office, Coubertin and Fikalas were able to carry their point, and the Games were opened by the King of Greece in the first week of April 1896, on Greek Independence Day, which was on March 25th according to the Julian calendar then in use in Greece. So, moving on to the awarding of the Olympic Games. The honour of holding the Olympic Games is entrusted to a city, not to a country. The choice of the city lies solely with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. Application to hold the Games is made by the chief authority of said city, with the support of the national government. Applications must state that no political meetings or demonstrations will be held in the stadium or other sports grounds or in the Olympic Village. Applicants also promise that every competitor shall be given free entry without any discrimination on grounds of religion, colour or political affiliation. This involves the assurance that the national government will not refuse visas to any competitors. At the Montreal Olympics in 1976, however, the Canadian government refused visas to the representatives of Taiwan because they were unwilling to forego the title of the Republic of China, under which their National Olympic Committee had been admitted to the IOC. This Canadian decision, in the opinion of the IOC, did great damage to the Olympic Games, and it was later resolved that any country in which the Games are organised must undertake to strictly observe the rules. It was acknowledged that enforcement would be difficult, and even the use of severe penalties by the IOC might not guarantee elimination of infractions. So, to reel off the list of where the Games have been held: 1896 Athens, 1900 Paris, 1904 St. Louis, 1908 London, 1912 Stockholm, 1920 Antwerp, 1924 back in Paris, 1928 Amsterdam, 1932 Los Angeles, 1936 was Berlin. Then we had World War II, for the first Games after that to be held in London in 1948, Helsinki 1952, in 1956 it was Melbourne, Australia, 1960 Rome, 1964 Tokyo, 1968 Mexico City, 1972 Munich, 1976 Montreal, 1980 Moscow, 1984 Los Angeles, 1988 Seoul, 1992 Barcelona, 1996 Atlanta, 2000 Sydney, 2004 Athens, 2008 Beijing, 2012 London, 2016 Rio de Janeiro, 2020 Tokyo, and 2024 Paris, with 2028 already decided to be Los Angeles. However, this next section is titled Corruption. In December 1998, the sporting world was shocked by allegations of widespread corruption within the IOC. It was charged that IOC members had accepted bribes in the form of cash, gifts, entertainment, business favours, travel expenses, medical expenses, and even college tuition for members' children from members of the committee that has successfully advanced the bid of Salt Lake City, Utah, as the site for the 2002 Winter Games. Accusations of impropriety were also alleged in the conduct of several previous bid committees. The IOC responded by expelling 6 committee members, and several others resigned. In December 1999, an IOC commission announced a 50-point reform package covering the selection and conduct of the IOC members, the bid process, the transparency of financial dealings, the size and conduct of the games, and drug regulation. The reform package also contained a number of provisions regulating the site selection process and clarifying the obligations of the IOC, the bid cities, and the National Olympic Committees. An independent IOC Ethics Commission also was established. We're now going to dive into some of the traditions of the Olympics, beginning with the ceremonies. So we have the opening ceremony. The form of the opening ceremony is laid down by the IOC in great detail, from the moment when the Chief of State of the host country is received by the President of the IOC and the organising committee at the entrance to the stadium, to the end of the proceedings when the last team files out. When the head of state has reached the appointed place in the tribune and is greeted with the national anthem, the parade of competitors begins. The Greek team is always the first to enter the stadium, and except for the host team, which is always last, the other countries follow in alphabetical order as determined by the language of the organising country. Each contingent dressed in its official uniform is preceded by a shield with the name of its country, while an athlete carries its national flag. At the 1980 Games, some of the countries protesting the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan the previous year carried the Olympic flag in place of their national flag in deference to a boycott of those games by other countries. The competitors march around the stadium and then form in groups in the centre facing the tribune. The president of the OCOG then delivers a brief speech of welcome, followed by another brief speech from the president of the IOC, who asks the Chief of State to proclaim the games open. A fanfare of trumpets sound as the Olympic flag is slowly raised. The Olympic flame is then carried into the stadium by the last of a series of runners who have brought the torch on a very long journey from Olympia, Greece. The runner circles the track, mounts the steps, and lights the Olympic fire that burns night and day during the games. The medal ceremonies. In individual Olympic events, the award for first place is gold, for second place a silver medal, and for third place a bronze medal. Solid gold medals were last given in 1912. The obverse side of the medal awarded in 2004 at Athens was altered for the first time since 1928 to better reflect origins of both the ancient and modern games, depicting the goddess Nike flying above a Greek stadium. The reverse side changed for each Olympiad, often displayed the official emblem of that particular games. At the 2004 Athens Games, athletes received authentic olive leaf crowns as well as medals. Diplomas are awarded for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th places. All competitors and officials receive a commemorative medal. And we have the closing ceremony. The closing ceremony takes place after the final event, which at the Summer Games is usually the equestrian breed in nations. The president of the IOC calls the youth of the world to assemble again in 4 years to celebrate the games of the next Olympiad. A fanfare is sounded, the Olympic fire is extinguished, and to the strains of the Olympic anthem, the Olympic flag is lowered and the games are over. But the festivities do not end there. The 1956 Olympics in Melbourne introduced one of the most important and effective of all Olympic customs. At the suggestion of John Ian Wing, a Chinese teenager living in Australia, the traditional parade of athletes divided into national teams was discarded, allowing athletes to mingle, many hand in hand, as they move around the stadium. This informal parade of athletes without distinction of nationality signifies the friendly bonds of Olympic sports and helps to foster a party atmosphere in the stadium. And we're going to end this history video by talking a little bit about the Olympic flag. So in the stadium and its immediate surroundings, the Olympic flag is flown freely together with the flags of the participating countries. The Olympic flag presented by Kubadan in 1914 is the prototype. It has a white background and in the circle there are 5 interlaced rings: blue, yellow, black, green and red. The blue ring is farthest left, nearest the pole. These rings represent the 5 parts of the world joined together in the Olympic movement. And the motto: in the 19th century, sporting organisations regularly chose a distinctive motto. As the official motto of the Olympic Games, Kubadan adopted Citius Altius Fortius, Latin for faster, higher, stronger, a phrase apparently coined by his friend Henry Didon, a friar, teacher and athletics enthusiast. Some people are now wary of this motto, fearing that it may be misinterpreted as a validation of performance-enhancing drugs. Equally well known is the saying known as the Credo. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win but to participate. Kubadan made that statement on a day when the British and Americans were bitterly disputing who had won the 400-metre race at the 1908 London Games. Although Kubadan attributed the words to Ethelbert Talbot, an American bishop, recent research suggests that the words are Kubadan's own, that he tactfully cited Talbot so as not to appear to admonish personally his English-speaking friends. And finally we have the flame and torch relay. Contrary to popular belief, the torch relay from the Temple of Hera in Olympia to the host city has no predecessor or parallel in antiquity. No relay was needed to run the torch from Olympia to Olympia. A perpetual fire was indeed maintained in Hera's temple, but it had no role in the ancient games. The Olympic flame first appeared at the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam. The torch relay was the ideal of Carl Diem, organiser of the 1936 Berlin Games, where the relay made its debut. Subsequent editions have grown larger and larger, with more runners, more spectators and greater distances. The 2004 relay reached all 7 continents on its way from Olympia to Athens. The relay is now one of the most splendid and cherished of all Olympic rituals. It emphasizes not only the ancient source of the Olympics, but also the internationalism of the modern games. The flame is now recognized everywhere as an emotionally charged symbol of peace. And that, my friends, is that. That was a relatively concise history of the Olympic Games, its origins, and reasons behind many of the things and aspects of the games that we see today. I really hope you did enjoy this video.